Hey there, does this look a little different than normal? It probably should, because I'm using a different frame rate, which is actually what we're talking about today. Frame rates, which ones there are, when to use them, when not to use them. Are there rules? Doesn't even matter. I don't know, but we're gonna check it out together. Let's get it. Hey there, hope you're doing really well. Today we're going to be talking about frame rates, which ones to use, when to use them, maybe when not to use them, and what your preferences might be. This all spawned out of a conversation that I was having with a friend recently who is starting to learn some more of the fundamentals of using a camera in editing and video editing and different things like that. So after our conversation, I just thought it'd be a good idea to put out this video because odds are there are more people with questions about this type of stuff. So messing around with different frame rates and knowing which ones I liked and how to use them took me a little while. We have all these different settings on our cameras. We even have them on our smartphones now. And you see these different options, and then there's different terminology that gets thrown around a bit. And so what I want to try to do with this video is to just help make things clear and plain and easy to understand for you to choose the frame rate that you want to use. So before we jump into the main portion, just want to mention if you get value out of this video, go ahead and add some value right back by hitting the like button, and also consider subscribing to the channel for more video content like this. Now let's get into the frame rates. So in this video, we're going to break down mainly 4 of the frame rates that I would say are the bread and butter standard that you find in most cameras and most smartphones nowadays. Now, when you're talking about frame rates, it simply means the frames per second that you're capturing in your camera. So the standards that we have are 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, and 120 frames per second. So let's first jump into why you would want to choose a certain frame rate over another. The main reason that you would want to choose one frame rate over another, it really is dependent on the look that you're going for. So the first one that I'm going to break down for you, which happens to be the one that I use in this video, it is my standard go-to, is 24 frames per second. Now, 24 frames per second is typically known as more of the cinematic style of frame rate. There's just something that is very unique about 24 frames per second that just makes it feel professional, that makes it feel like it's a little bit higher budget. 24 frames per second is really the standard for movies and cinema. That's why they say it's more cinematic. It's really the standard for any sort of big budget film. There's just something really visually appealing about 24 frames per second that to me looks very cinematic as well, and that's why I choose to use them in my videos. Now let's jump into our second frame rate that we're going to be breaking down, and that is 30 frames per second. Now 30 frames per second is really cool if it's a look that you enjoy. I personally don't enjoy it as much, but I understand why some people do. If you've ever seen a soap opera, which I'm sure we're all probably guilty of at some point, 30 frames per second is the soap opera look. It's kind of tough to explain, but whenever you see it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's just this real crisp looking movement that happens, especially when it's a dramatic moment, and things just kind of pop. There are also some YouTubers who tend to be more on the tech side of things who use 30 frames per second. And like I said, this is all a bit of a preference thing and whatever you like to look at. Some people think 24 frames per second is choppy. Other people say 30 frames per second, it's unnatural looking. It's really all down to your personal preference. But I know for some people like MKBHD, he always shoots in 30 frames per second unless he was going to do some sort of a slow motion. And it's just a very distinct look to his videos. And if you go and check them out, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Just kind of has that more realistic, crisp movement is the way that I think I can explain it best with my eyes. So 30 frames per second, some people love it, some people hate it. It's not my personal preference, but if it's something that you really think is gonna help your video to stand out, by all means, go for it and use it. Now, as we move on, I want to group in our third and fourth frame rates, which are 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second for this reason, is that these are typically used more so for, I would say, live stream setups and slow motion. If you've ever watched a Twitch stream with somebody who's like a gamer, I don't know, Ninja or whoever your favorite is, odds are they're probably using a camera that has a higher frame rate, and it just gives it this very distinct look with the motion. It's the same thing as 30 frames per second, where you're just adding more frames in per second, but instead of 30, you're doubling it to 60, and then instead of 60, you can double that even up to 120, and it just adds to even more of that crispiness in the video. It was actually what I shot the intro portion of this video with, and that's why I was also able to slow it down, which moves me into the slow motion portion. But before I really get into the nitty-gritty of that, I actually want to take you to the computer because I think it's going to help make a lot more sense of this. Okay, so now that we are at the computer, I want to show you more of a visual representation of the differences between all of these frame rates. Not only that, but how you can use them in conjunction with each other on a 24 frame per second timeline. Let's hop in. All right, so here we are in Final Cut Pro 10. I am a Final Cut editor, but you can do this on any type of video editing software that allows you to change the speed of the clips that you shoot. All right, so on my timeline here, I have a 24 frame per second clip, 30 frame per second clip, 60 frame per second clip, and a 120 frame per second clip. And what I want to show you is how on a 24 frame per second timeline, we can use all these clips in conjunction with each other. Like I said here, we have a 2-second clip. Let's just play this one through. Me waving my arms, no big deal. Now we're gonna move to the 30 frame per second clip. A little bit more crisp looking. I'm gonna slow this guy down by clicking on it and then going over here to the little speed watch right there. What is that? That's a gauge. There it is. It's a gauge, speed gauge. We're going to take this down to custom. And what we're going to do is we're going to slow this down to 80%. So we're stretching our clip out so that way 30 stretches into a smaller number of 24 frames per second. So let's check it out. So this is our 24 frame per second clip. Pretty normal looking. So we move into our 30. This is now what it looks like. So if you didn't know the difference from clip to clip, you would just think I'm moving a little bit slower. Sometimes people slow down a 30 frame clip down into 24. I've seen it done on music videos and other types of special projects. It's not something that I really do, but it's something that you can do and you should know about it. Let's try the same thing here with our 60 frames per second clip. So we're gonna go over here to the gauge. We're gonna go to custom to slow it down. And we are gonna add in here 40%. Now essentially we have just times this clip by 2.5, if you will. So we had a 2-second clip, which is now a 5-second clip. So let's take a look at what it looks like. Again, our 24 frame per second reference, 30 frames down to 60 frames. Much slower. Again, this is the standard slow motion look. A lot of campers have a 60 frame per second option. Don't feel like you have to have 120 frames in order to do proper slow motion. 60 frames works really, really well, and it has a really great effect. So let's try this one more time now, but with our 120 frames per second clip. So we come over here. This is what it's looking like right now. Pretty choppy, but once we hit it, go to the gauge, custom speed, and we are now slowing this guy down to 20%. And as you see, we get a much bigger clip here, but here's the effect. Super slow motion. So now let's roll them all back one more time so you can see the differences between these clips. So as you can see, using different frame rates can really accentuate your videos. It can add more to the feel, the vibe, and the dynamics of your shots. Then I would encourage you to switch up your frame rates. If you're only using 24 frames per second for everything, why not throw in a 60 or a 120 to get some nice slow motion? Maybe you're feeling like 24 is a little blah. Go ahead and try 30 frames, see how you like it. And this whole thing can apply to 30 frames too. You could take 60 frames per second, slow it down to 30 and have nice slow motion. Same with 120. You just have to do the math and the percentages on it. But it's a really, really helpful and effective thing to know the differences with your frame rates in order to make better quality videos. So I hope that you got some value out of this video. Go ahead and let me know down in the comments which is your favorite frame rate that you use and how do you use it. And if you got some value out of this video, why don't you go ahead and add some value right back to it by hitting that like button. And also don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification icons. That way you can get updated when I post fresh videos on here. You can also check me out on Instagram for fresh content every day where I'm posting. I'm so excited that we're able to learn together, to create together, and be inspired to go to new levels in our creativity. My name is Zach Sopak, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.